The first gunshot cracked through the night air, just as Grace Miller set down a pot of fresh coffee. The sound was sharp and close, so close that the windows of the diner shivered in their frames. For one long second, nobody moved. The old trucker at the counter froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. The young couple in the second booth stopped talking in the middle of a word. The radio behind the counter kept playing a soft country song, as if nothing in the world had changed. Then the second sound came. It was not another shot. It was worse. It was the sound of a man hitting the ground in the alley behind the kitchen. A heavy, final sound that Grace felt in her chest more than she heard with her ears. Everyone else in the diner did the sensible thing. The trucker dropped to the floor behind the counter. The couple ran for the front door and out into the parking lot, leaving their food and their coats behind. The cook, a nervous man named Pete, locked himself in the freezer and would not come out for an hour. Grace did the thing that made no sense at all. She ran toward the sound. Later, she would never be able to explain why. She was 26 years old. She had a younger brother at home who needed her, a stack of medical bills on her kitchen table, and a life that was already hard enough without gunfire in it. Every part of her mind screamed at her to hide. But her feet were already moving through the kitchen, past the grill, past the shelves of clean plates, toward the back door that opened into the alley. She knew, somehow, who was out there. She knew before she pushed the door open. The man from the corner booth. He came in almost every night, always after midnight, always alone. He never said much. He ordered black coffee and sometimes a slice of pie, and he sat with his back to the wall where he could see the whole room. He was tall, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to notice everything. He tipped far too much, folding the bills under his cup so she would find them after he left. The other waitresses were a little afraid of him. Grace had never been afraid of him. Not once, though she could not have said why. His name, she had learned from a credit card receipt months ago, was Adam Cole. Tonight he had left the diner 10 minutes before closing. He had paused at the door, looked back at her, and said something he had never said before. "Be careful going home tonight, Grace." Then he was gone into the dark. Now she shoved the back door open, and the cold mountain air hit her face, and there he was. Adam Cole lay against the brick wall of the alley, one hand pressed to his shoulder. Even in the weak yellow light from the single bulb above the door, she could see the dark stains spreading through his shirt. His face was gray. His breathing came in short, rough pulls. But his eyes were open, and when they found her, they went wide with something that looked almost like fear. Not fear for himself, fear for her. "Go back inside," he said. His voice was low and strained. "Go back inside and lock the door." Grace did not go back inside. Because at the far end of the alley, two shapes were moving. Two men, dressed in dark clothes, walking without any hurry at all. That was the detail that frightened her most, even more than the gun she could see in the taller one's hand. They were not running. They were not nervous. They moved like men finishing a job, calm and patient, and they were coming straight toward Adam. Grace's mind went very quiet. It was strange. She had always thought that in a moment like this she would panic, that her thoughts would turn to noise. Instead, everything became slow and clear, like the world had been placed under glass. She saw the fire alarm on the wall just inside the kitchen door. She saw the switch panel next to it that controlled the big lights over the back lot, the bright ones the delivery trucks used. She saw the distance between the two men and Adam, maybe 40 steps. She saw all of it at once, and her hand was already moving. She yanked the fire alarm down. The night exploded with sound. The alarm was old and brutally loud, a screaming bell that could be heard half a mile down the highway. In the same motion, Grace slammed her palm across the whole row of light switches, and the back lot flooded with white light, bright as noon, pouring into the alley and washing over the two men like a wave. They stopped. For the first time, they looked uncertain. Lights were coming on in the apartments above the hardware store across the road. A dog began barking somewhere. Out front, she could hear the trucker shouting into his phone, calling for help. The whole sleeping edge of the town of Silvercrest was waking up, and every window was turning toward the diner. A face she would see again, though she did not know it yet. Then they turned and walked away, back into the dark between the buildings, and were gone. Grace let out a breath she did not remember holding. Her legs felt like water. But there was no time for her legs to feel like anything, because Adam Cole was trying to stand up, and he was failing. She got her shoulder under his good arm before he could fall. He was heavier than she expected, solid as a tree, and burning hot. That was the first strange thing she noticed. His skin, even through his shirt, was hot like a fever. Hotter than any fever she had ever felt when she nursed her brother through the flu. "Inside," she said. "Come on. Move your feet." "I cannot stay here," he said through his teeth. "You do not understand. If they come back, everyone in that building is in danger. You are in danger." "Then we will hurry," Grace said, and something in her voice must have surprised him, because he stopped arguing and moved. She half carried, half dragged him through the kitchen door, and pulled it shut behind them, sliding the heavy bolt across. The alarm was still screaming. She reached up and shut it off, and the sudden silence rang in her ears. From the front of the diner she could hear the trucker still talking loudly on his phone, telling someone that shots had been fired, that everyone should come quick. Good, let them come. Lights and people and noise were the only weapons she had. She steered Adam into the dry storage room at the back of the kitchen, a narrow space lined with shelves of canned tomatoes and sacks of flour, and eased him down onto an overturned crate. Then she grabbed the first aid kit off the wall, knelt in front of him, and reached for his shirt. "Do not," he said. "I have to see it. Grace." His voice changed. It dropped lower, and there was a weight in it now. A strange pressure, like the air before a storm. "Listen to me. You have already done more than you know. Walk out of this room. Tell the police you never saw me. Forget my face." She looked up at him. His jaw was tight with pain. Sweat ran down his temple, and his eyes, which she had always thought were dark brown, caught the light of the bare bulb overhead, and flashed, just for a heartbeat, a deep and impossible gold. Grace's heart stumbled. She told herself it was the light. She told herself a lot of things in that half-second, and believed none of them. "I am not leaving," she said, "so you can either let me help you, or you can bleed on my flour sacks until you pass out, and then I will help you anyway. Your choice." For a long moment he just looked at her, and then, to her complete surprise, Adam Cole laughed. It was quiet and rough, and it clearly hurt him, but it was a real laugh, and it changed his whole face. "They said you were stubborn," he said. "Who said?" But he did not answer that. Instead he pulled his hand away from his shoulder, and Grace looked at the wound, and everything she thought she knew about the world began, very quietly, to come apart. The wound was not bleeding the way it should. Around the small, dark hole in his shoulder, the skin was not just torn, it was burned. Thin gray lines spread out from it like frost on a window, and a faint wisp of something that looked like smoke, actual smoke, curled up from it and vanished in the cold air of the storage room. The smell was strange, sharp and metallic, like a struck match mixed with winter rain. "That is not normal," she heard herself say. "No," Adam agreed. His voice was getting weaker. "It is not. What is happening to you?" "Silver," he said. "The bullet is silver, and if it stays in me until the moon rises, it will kill me." Grace knelt there on the cold concrete floor, holding a roll of bandages, and the word hung in the air between them. Silver. She thought of every story her grandmother used to tell when Grace was small, stories the rest of the family had laughed at, stories about the mountains around Silvercrest and the things that ran through them on bright nights. She thought about how her grandmother had never once laughed when she told them. Sirens were rising in the distance now, coming up the highway. 2 minutes away, maybe 3. Adam heard them too. He looked at the door, then back at her, and she watched him make a decision. "My name is Adam Cole," he said quietly. "I lead a family that lives in these mountains, a very old family. We are not what we seem, and the men who shot me tonight know exactly what we are. That is why they used silver. I am telling you this because in about 2 minutes, you will have to choose whether to hand me to the police, which will end with me dead by morning, or hide me, which will pull you into a world you cannot imagine. I have no right to ask it of you, so I am not asking. I am only telling you the truth, because after what you just did in that alley, the truth is the least of what I owe you." The sirens grew louder. Red and blue light began to flicker through the small window of the storage room, sweeping across the shelves. Grace looked at the smoking wound. She looked at the man from the corner booth, the man who tipped too much and always watched the door, the man whose eyes had turned gold in the dark. She thought of her brother asleep at home, of her small, safe, ordinary life, of every reason to stand up and walk away. Then she stood, but not to walk away. She pulled the string on the bare bulb, dropping the storage room into darkness, and turned the lock on the inside of the door. "Stay quiet," she said, "and do not die in my storage room. I just cleaned it." In the dark, she heard him breathe out something that might have been "thank you," or might have been her name. Then she slipped out, locked the door behind her, smoothed down her apron, and walked toward the flashing lights to tell the first lie of her new life. The police officer's flashlight swept across the kitchen, and Grace kept her hands steady by holding a coffee pot. She had learned something about herself in the last 20 minutes. She was a better liar than she had ever wanted to be. "2 shots," she told the officer, a tired man named Officer Bell who had been coming to the diner for years and always ordered the meatloaf. Maybe from the road, maybe from behind the buildings. Everybody ran. I hit the alarm to scare them off. No, she had not seen anyone hurt. No, she had not gone outside. Yes, she was frightened. That part at least was true. Officer Bell wrote it all down, checked the alley, found a few dark drops on the ground that could have been anything, and told her to lock up early and go home. He even offered to have a car drive past her apartment that night. Grace thanked him and watched through the front windows as the last of the flashing lights pulled out of the parking lot and slid away down the dark highway. Then she stood alone in the empty diner, listening to the hum of the pie case, and let herself shake for exactly 1 minute. She timed it by the clock over the register. 1 minute of shaking hands and racing heart, and a voice in her head asking her what in the world she thought she was doing. When the minute was over, she took a breath, filled a bowl with hot water, gathered clean towels, the first aid kit, a bottle of drinking alcohol from under the register, and the long, thin pliers from the toolbox Pete kept for fixing the grill. She boiled the pliers in a pot on the stove, because she had seen someone do that in a movie once. Then she unlocked the storage room door. Adam was still on the crate, slumped against the shelves, and for one terrible second she thought she was too late. His eyes were closed. The gray lines around the wound had spread, crawling down his arm like winter creeping across a pond. But when the light touched his face, his eyes opened, and they were fully gold now, both of them, bright and strange and fixed on her. "You came back," he said. His voice was a dry whisper. "I told you I would." She knelt and laid out the towels. "How long until the moon rises?" He turned his head slightly, as if he could feel the sky through the walls. 40 minutes, maybe less. "Then talk me through this," she said, "because I have never taken a bullet out of anyone, and if you faint, I need to already know what I am doing." Something like respect moved across his face. He talked her through it. His voice stayed low and even, and she understood that he was working hard to keep it that way, to keep her calm by staying calm himself. "The bullet was not deep," he said. "Silver did not travel the way lead did in a body like his. His body had been trying to push it out and failing, which was why the wound smoked and burned. She would feel the bullet with the tips of the pliers. It would feel different from bone. She should grip it firmly and pull it straight out, no twisting, no hesitation. "You will not hurt me more than I have been hurt," he said. "And I promise you, whatever sounds I make, whatever you see my body do, I will never hurt you. That is the one thing in this room you never have to fear." Strangely, she believed him. Her hands stopped trembling the moment she picked up the pliers, as if her body had decided to trust him, before her mind finished arguing about it. The next few minutes were the longest of her life. The overhead bulb swung slightly on its cord, moving the shadows. Sweat rolled down Adam's face, and his good hand gripped the steel shelf beside him so hard that the metal groaned and bent like cardboard. Grace saw that happen out of the corner of her eye, saw 4 finger-shaped dents appear in solid steel, and made the choice to think about it later. Her whole world narrowed to the wound, the pliers, and the small hard shape she could feel at the bottom of the wound, a shape that seemed to hiss faintly against the metal tools like water on a hot pan. "Straight out," she whispered. "No hesitation." She pulled. Adam made a sound that was not quite human, a deep rolling sound from somewhere in his chest that made the canned goods rattle on the shelves. The bullet came free, a small misshapen lump of pale metal, still smoking, and Grace dropped it into the bowl of water, where it cracked and spat like a hot coal. And then the strangest thing yet happened, the thing she would think about every night for weeks afterward. The gray frost lines on Adam's skin stopped spreading. Then they began to fade, pulling back toward the wound the way a tide pulls back from the shore. The wound itself stopped smoking. Before her eyes, in the space of a dozen slow breaths, the edges of it drew together, knit closed, and smoothed over, leaving only a fresh pink scar and a smear of drying blood to prove any of it had happened at all. Grace sat back on her heels. "That is not possible," she said. "For most people, no," Adam agreed. He flexed his hand, rolled his shoulder, and breathed deep, and the color came back into his face like a sunrise. "But there is something I do not understand." He looked at her with those gold eyes, and now there was open confusion in them. "It should not have healed that fast. Even for me. Even with the silver gone. That kind of healing takes hours, not minutes. Unless what?" But he shook his head slowly, watching her like she was a puzzle written in a language he had almost forgotten. "What is your family name, Grace?" "Miller." "And your grandmother's name, before she married?" Grace blinked. "Why does that matter?" "Humor me." "Hale," she said. Her name was Eleanor Hale. She grew up somewhere in these mountains, but she never talked about it much. "She died when I was 12. Adam went very still. It was not an ordinary stillness. It was the stillness of a deer that has heard a branch snap, the stillness of a held breath. "Eleanor Hale," he repeated softly, and he said the name the way people say names in church. "You knew her." "Every family in these mountains knew that name," he said. "But that is a conversation for a safer place than this." He rose to his feet, and now he moved the way she remembered from the diner, smooth and sure and quiet. He looked down at her, and his voice turned formal, almost old-fashioned. "Grace Miller, tonight you saved my life twice, once with an alarm and once with a pair of grill pliers. Where I come from, a debt like that is not a small thing. It is a bond, and my family will honor it for as long as you live. If you are ever in danger, in any place, on any night, say my name out loud and help will come. I promise you that." Grace stood up too, suddenly aware of how tired she was, how late it was, how far past strange this night had traveled. "That is a nice speech," she said. "But I mostly just want to go home, check on my brother, and sleep for a year." "Your brother?" Adam's brow drew down. "You live with him alone?" "He is 16. He has been sick a long time. His lungs." She did not know why she was telling him. "It is just the two of us." Adam walked to the small window and looked out at the night, and she saw his shoulders tighten. "The men who came for me tonight saw your face," he said quietly. "They saw what you did. Men like that do not forgive being beaten by a waitress with a fire alarm." He turned back to her. "Let me have someone watch your street. You will never see them, but I will sleep easier." "No," Grace said. The word came out fast and hard, pushed by a whole lifetime of carrying things alone. "No shadows outside my window. No strangers watching my brother. I helped you because you were bleeding in my alley, not to buy myself into whatever this is. I am glad you are alive. I am. But my life is small and ordinary, and I need it to stay that way. Please." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slowly, and she saw what it cost him. "As you wish," he said. "But the offer does not expire. Ever." He slipped out through the back door into the dark, and he was simply gone, the way smoke is gone, and Grace locked up the diner with hands that had finally, truly stopped shaking. The drive home took 11 minutes. She spent all of them convincing herself that tomorrow her life would go back to normal, that tonight would fade into a wild story she someday might tell, that the worst was over. Then she turned onto her street, and every one of those comfortable thoughts died at once. The door of her apartment stood open. Light spilled down the front steps, and through the doorway she could see her home turned inside out, drawers pulled from the dresser, cushions cut open, her grandmother's old cedar box lying broken on the floor with its contents scattered, as if someone had been searching for something very specific and had not cared what they destroyed to find it. Grace was out of the car before it fully stopped, her heart slamming, one word filling her whole body. Leo. Her brother's name. She ran up the steps into the wreck of her ordinary life, calling for him, and the apartment answered her with silence. The silence lasted 3 heartbeats, and they were the worst 3 heartbeats of Grace's life. Then a thin voice came from the back of the apartment, muffled and shaking. "Grace? Is that you?" She tore down the hallway and found the bathroom door locked from the inside. "Leo, it is me. Open up, it is me." The lock clicked, and the door swung in, and there was her brother, 16 years old, and pale as paper, sitting in the bathtub, with a kitchen knife in one hand, and his inhaler in the other. His breathing was bad, whistling high in his chest, but he was whole. He was alive. Grace pulled him up and held on to him so hard he complained, and she did not let go for a long time anyway. The story came out between careful breaths. He had been asleep. He woke to the sound of the front door lock breaking, quiet and fast, like someone who had done it 100 times. 2 men. He heard them talking low as they went through the apartment. He had done exactly what Grace had drilled into him since he was small, back when their neighborhood was rougher. Bathroom. Lock. Quiet. Wait. Through the crack under the door, he had seen their boots pass twice. They were looking for something, Leo said. Not money. My laptop is still on my desk. They kept saying a name. He frowned, trying to catch it. Hale. They kept saying Hale. One of them said, "It has to be here. She is Hale blood. The old woman would have left it with her kin." Grace. Who is Hale? Grace sat down slowly on the edge of the tub, because her legs would not hold her anymore. Grandma, she said. Grandma was a Hale. She stood in the ruin of the living room a few minutes later, looking at her grandmother's broken cedar box. It had sat on a shelf for 14 years, holding old photographs, a dried flower, a thimble, small soft pieces of a finished life. All of it was thrown across the floor, and the box itself had been torn apart with a purpose, its bottom panel snapped in half, and that was when Grace saw what she had never known was there. The box had a false bottom, a hidden space, flat and thin, built into the cedar by careful hands. It was empty, but it had not been empty long, because pressed into the felt lining was the clear outline of what it had held for years, a shape like a large old-fashioned key, and lying in the corner of the hidden space, missed by the searchers in their hurry, was a single small photograph, brown with age. Grace picked it up with cold fingers. The photograph showed a young woman standing in front of a great timber lodge in the mountains, pine forest rising behind it. The woman was unmistakably her grandmother, Eleanor, young and laughing, her hair loose in the wind. Beside her stood a tall man with dark hair, and even faded and brown. Even across 60 years, there was no mistaking the line of his jaw and the way he stood, still and sure, like a tree, with roots down to the center of the earth. He looked so much like Adam Cole that Grace's breath caught. On the back of the photograph, in her grandmother's neat schoolteacher hand, were 4 words. Silvercrest. Before I ran. Sirens would not help her tonight. Police would ask questions she could not answer without sounding insane. The men who had done this were the same men from the alley. She was sure of it in her bones, and they had not found what they came for, which meant they would come back, and next time Leo might not wake up fast enough. Grace stood in her wrecked living room, in the wreck of her small, safe, ordinary life, and understood that the door back to yesterday was closed. There was only one road left, and it led straight into the dark. She had refused Adam's protection 3 hours ago. Pride was a luxury. Leo was not. She did not have a phone number. She did not have an address. She had one thing, a promise that had sounded like superstition when he made it. If you are ever in danger, in any place, on any night, say my name out loud and help will come. Feeling foolish and desperate in equal measure, Grace walked to the broken front door, looked out into the sleeping street and said, not loudly, just clearly, into the night air, Adam Cole, I need help. For a long moment, nothing. Wind in the maple tree. A distant truck on the highway. Leo watching her from the hallway like she had lost her mind. Then, at the end of the street, a shadow detached itself from the deeper shadow of the hedgerow, and a young woman stepped out under the streetlight. She could not have been much older than Grace, with short dark hair and quick eyes, dressed like a jogger, though no one jogged at 2 in the morning. She walked up the path as if she had been invited, stopped at the bottom of the steps, and looked at the broken door with a face that grew darker with every second. You were never supposed to see me, the woman said. He told me to keep back a street. I am sorry. I circled the block one time, and this happened. She pulled out a phone, pressed it once, and said 2 words. They came. Within 10 minutes, Grace's quiet street was quietly full. No sirens, no flashing lights, just 3 plain vehicles arriving from 3 directions, and half a dozen people who moved like the young woman moved, easy and light, and always aware of every window and every shadow. and then a gray truck, and out of it came Adam Cole, and the look on his face when he saw the broken door made Grace understand something for the first time. She had thought his stillness in the diner was calm. It was not calm. It was control. And tonight, walking up her steps, it was control over something enormous. He stopped in front of her. "I am sorry," he said simply. "This is my fault. They followed my trail to your door." "They were not following you," Grace said, and held up the photograph. She watched it hit him. He took the picture gently, as if it might break, and looked at the young laughing woman and the tall man, and Grace saw his throat move. "That is my grandfather," he said quietly, "Edmund Cole. And that is Eleanor Hale, standing in front of our lodge, in the last summer anyone ever saw her." He turned the photograph over, and read the 4 words, and closed his eyes briefly. "All my life, people have argued about why she ran, and where she went. She was the most gifted healer the Mountain families ever produced, and she was carrying something when she left. Something that belonged to all the families together, that was given to her to guard, because no one alive was trusted more. It has been lost for 60 years. He looked up at Grace. "Tonight, someone tore your home apart looking for it." "A key," Grace said. There was a hidden space in her box, shaped like a key. They took it. Something crossed Adam's face then, that she had not seen on him before. Not in the alley. Not even with silver burning in his shoulder. It looked very close to fear. "Then we have less time than I thought," he said. He turned and gave quiet instructions, and people moved. He turned back to Grace and Leo, and his voice gentled. "I know what you told me tonight, that your life was small and ordinary, and you needed it to stay that way. I would give a great deal to hand it back to you. But the men who have that key will learn soon that it is not enough on its own. It never was. A key wants a lock, and a lock wants the right hand to turn it." He hesitated, and then said the rest. "A Hale hand, Grace. Your grandmother made sure of that before she ran. They will come back for you. Not for anything you have, for what you are." Leo's whistling breath sounded loud in the quiet. Grace put her arm around her brother, and felt how thin his shoulders were, and made the only choice there was. "Where do we go?" she asked. "Home," Adam said, and for a moment the word seemed to mean more to him than she could measure. "To the mountains, to Silvercrest Lodge. It is the one place in this world they cannot reach you." He glanced at the photograph in her hand, at the timber walls and the pines. "Besides," he said softly, "it seems you have been expected there for 60 years. They drove up into the mountains as the sky turned pale, Leo asleep against her shoulder, the road climbing through pine and granite and morning mist. And when the trees finally opened, and Grace saw the great timber lodge standing in the high meadow, exactly as it stood in the old photograph, unchanged by 60 years, smoke rising from its chimneys and figures already gathering on its wide porch to watch them come, she felt 2 things at once, so tangled she could not pull them apart. The first was the feeling of arriving somewhere she had never been, and recognizing it anyway, deep down, like a song from childhood. The second was the feeling of every eye on that porch fixed on her, and not all of them friendly. The lodge was bigger than the photograph had made it look. Up close it was almost a village under one roof, 3 stories of honey-colored timber, wings and porches and stone chimneys, built by hands that had clearly expected it to stand for centuries. Perhaps 40 people lived there, Adam told her, with more families scattered in houses through the surrounding valleys. They called themselves, simply, the Silvercrest family. Grace noticed that he was careful with his words around Leo, and she was grateful. One impossible truth at a time. The welcome was not warm. Oh, they were polite. Rooms were prepared, good rooms with windows facing the sunrise. A doctor, a calm gray-haired woman named Ruth, examined Leo's lungs within the first hour, and began mixing him a tea that smelled of pine and honey, and made him breathe easier by evening than he had breathed in a year. Food appeared, clothes appeared. Everything Grace and Leo could need appeared, quietly and without fuss. But the eyes told a different story. Conversation stopped when Grace entered a room and started again, lower, when she left. In the long dining hall, a space cleared around wherever she sat, not obviously, never rudely, but as surely as oil clears away from water. She caught fragments. The Hale girl, after 60 years. He brought her here, to this house, after what that family did. On the 3rd evening she finally heard it plainly. She had stepped out onto the back porch for air and found two men talking below in the dark, not knowing she was there. One voice she recognized, a broad-shouldered man named Carl, who was Adam's second in command, his right hand, the one they called his beta. Eleanor Hale ran off with the guardianship of every family in these mountains, Carl was saying, low and bitter. My grandfather spent 10 years searching for her, and it broke him. 60 years we have lived exposed because of what she took, and now her granddaughter sleeps under our roof, and Adam looks at her like she hung the moon. I am telling you, no good comes through that door with the name Hale behind it. She saved his life, the other man said. Or she was placed in that diner to be exactly where she needed to be, Carl said. Ask yourself who benefits, in the end, from getting a Hale inside these walls. Grace went back inside without a sound and did not sleep much that night. She might have packed and left the next morning, pride and hurt pushing her down the mountain, if the next morning had gone differently. But the next morning, everything changed, because of a boy named Danny. Danny was 7, all elbows and questions, one of the crowd of children who thundered through the lodge like weather. Grace was crossing the yard when she heard the crack of a branch, and then the sound she already knew too well, a body hitting the ground. Danny had fallen from the big oak by the woodshed. By the time she reached him, others were running too, but she was first, and what she saw made her stomach drop. His arm was badly broken, bent where no arm should bend, and he was white with shock, too frightened even to cry. Grace did not decide to do what she did next. Her hands decided. They moved on their own, one cradling the broken arm, the other flat against it, and she heard her own voice talking, low and steady, nonsense comfort, the same voice she had used through 100 bad nights with Leo. And under her hands she felt something happen. Warmth poured out of her palms, not from them but through them, from somewhere underneath her, as if she were a window that something bright had suddenly opened. Danny stopped shaking. His color came flooding back, and under Grace's hands, slowly, gently, with a feeling like a knot loosening, the broken arm straightened itself and grew quiet and whole. The yard had gone completely silent. Grace looked up. A ring of people stood around her, a dozen of them, and every face wore the same expression, and it was not suspicion anymore. It was awe, and it was fear, and in the older faces it was recognition, as if a ghost had walked out of the tree line into the morning sun. Ruth the doctor pushed through the ring, looked at Danny's arm, looked at Grace's hands, and said, in the hush, 4 words, Eleanor, she is Eleanor's. That night, Adam found Grace on the highest porch, wrapped in a borrowed coat, staring at the biggest sky she had ever seen. He stood beside her at the rail for a while without speaking. Below in the meadow, small lights moved among the trees. The family, at their nightly rounds. She had stopped asking questions she was not ready to have answered. Danny is fine, Adam said finally. Climbing furniture already. His mother has cooked enough food for you to feed a town. You will find it outside your door for the rest of your natural life, I expect. I did not do anything, Grace said. It did itself. Whatever it is, it just happened. Through me. That is exactly how your grandmother described it, said a new voice, and an old woman stepped out onto the porch. She was small and straight-backed, with white braided hair, and Grace had seen how even Adam inclined his head to her. Her name was Vera, and she was the eldest of the family, and she had been a girl in this lodge when Eleanor Hale was young. Now she came and stood at the rail on Grace's other side and looked at her with eyes that missed nothing. 60 years ago, Vera said, this family and the 5 mountain families around it entrusted one thing to one woman. It has an old name, but plainly, it is a key, and what it opens is a vault under the oldest stones of this mountain, and what is in the vault is the record of every family, every name, every bloodline, every safe haven, every truth about what we are, gathered over 300 years. In the wrong hands, it is not a treasure. It is a weapon that could end us, all of us, in every valley on this earth. That is why it was locked away, why the key was made, so that only one bloodline could ever turn it. The healer's line, the Hale line, the line trusted above all others, because a healer cannot bear harm. And that is why, when trouble came in her time, and Eleanor believed the mountain itself was no longer safe, she did the unthinkable to keep it safe. She took the key, and she vanished into the ordinary world, where no one would ever look, and she let the whole world curse her name, rather than tell a single soul the truth. Vera turned her old eyes to the dark mountains. I cursed her too, God forgive me, her own closest friend. 60 years I cursed her. And she was guarding us the whole time, alone, in exile, to her grave, and passed the burden in silence down her own blood, to a girl carrying coffee in a roadside diner. Grace gripped the rail, cold air, wood smoke, the enormous sky. She did not know that, she said. My grandmother never told me anything. I did not choose to guard anything. No, Vera agreed gently. You only chose to run toward a gunshot when every soul around you ran away. Blood remembers, child, even when the mind was never told. Adam had been quiet, and when he spoke, his voice was careful. There is more, Grace, and you need all of it. The men who shot me, who tore apart your home, work for a man named Victor Crane. He leads a family in the north, an old family gone wrong, and he has spent 20 years hunting for the Hale key. 3 nights ago he finally got it. He has already tried it on the vault, and nothing happened, because a key of that making is only metal without the right hand to turn it. He paused, which means Victor Crane now knows exactly what he is missing. Not a thing. A person. The last of the Hale line. The night wind moved through the pines, and it sounded like the mountain breathing. Me, Grace said. You, said Adam. And Grace, there is one more thing, and I would rather you hear it from me on this porch than from a whisper in a hallway. Crane does not simply want the vault opened. He wants it opened, and then he wants no other hand on this earth that could ever open it again. Do you understand what I am telling you? Grace looked down at her own 2 hands on the rail, the same hands that had held a coffee pot a week ago, the same hands that had pulled a smoking bullet from a dying man, the same hands that had knitted a child's arm whole in the morning sun. Yes, she said, and was surprised how steady her voice came out. I understand. He needs me once, and then he needs me gone. Winter came early to the high country, and Grace learned the rhythms of a world she had never imagined. She learned that the family's other nature was not a curse or a horror, but simply another way of being alive, worn as naturally as a coat, and that on bright nights, the meadow filled with swift gray shapes running for the pure joy of running. She learned that Leo, breathing mountain air, and Ruth's tease grew stronger every week, until one day, she watched him race Danny across the yard and win, laughing, and she had to turn away so no one would see her cry. She learned the family's names and their stories, and slowly, one shared meal, and one healed sprain, and one long evening at a time, the space that used to clear around her at the table filled in, until she looked up one night and realized she was simply sitting among friends. She learned other things too. Vera taught her in the mornings, in a sunlit room that had once been Eleanor's. The gift ran deeper than mending bones. It was a current, Vera said, and a current could flow both ways, and a healer must know both banks of her own river, even if she prayed never to visit the far one. Grace learned to feel the life in a room with her eyes closed, each person a small warm lamp. She learned to pour strength in. And once, under Vera's careful watch, with her hand on the old woman's arm, she learned that she could draw strength out, gently, the way you draw water. And Vera had nodded slowly and said, Your grandmother could do that too. And she feared it, and her fear kept everyone safe. Remember both banks, child. And she learned Adam. It happened so gradually that she could never afterward name the day it began. He was simply there, at the edge of her mornings and the center of her evenings. He was the one who quietly arranged for Leo's school books to appear, so the boy would not fall behind. He was the one who found her the first time homesickness ambushed her, standing in the pantry of all places, crying over a brand of tinned peaches her mother used to buy, and who said nothing at all, just stood with her among the shelves until the wave passed. He was the one who laughed, really laughed, when she beat him at cards, and the whole dining hall had gone silent in wonder, because apparently no one had heard that sound in years. She knew the family saw it. She caught Ruth and Vera trading glances over their mending. She heard the children whisper. And she knew something else, because lodges keep few secrets. There was an arrangement, made years ago, a promise between families. To seal peace with the powerful family of the Eastern Range, Adam had agreed in principle to marry their leader's daughter, a woman named Diane, whom he had met exactly 4 times. It was not love, and no one pretended it was. It was policy, old style, the way mountain families had bound themselves together for centuries. The wedding had no date, but the promise sat there all the same, like a stone in a field that everyone plowed around. Diane herself came to the lodge in midwinter, with her father and a party of the Eastern family, to discuss the growing threat of Victor Crane. She was tall and sharp and honest, and Grace, prepared to dislike her, found she could not. On the second evening, Diane sought Grace out where she sat alone by the great fireplace and settled beside her without ceremony. "So you are the reason," Diane said. "The reason for what?" "The reason he looks out windows," Diane said. She said it without anger, studying Grace with frank curiosity. "I have known Adam Cole since we were children, and I have never once seen him look out a window as if he were missing something on the other side of it. He does it constantly now." She was quiet a moment. "I am not in love with him, you understand. This match is my father's chess, not my heart. But I will tell you something about our world, Grace Miller, that you had better learn faster than you learned healing. Among our families, a leader's word is stone. If Adam breaks a promised match, even one with no love in it, the Eastern Range takes it as an insult written in stone. And with Crane gathering strength in the north, a broken bond between our two families could cost lives when the storm comes. He knows that. It is why he will never speak a word of what is written all over his face every time you walk into a room." Diane stood, straightening her coat. "I am not telling you this to be cruel. I am telling you because I think the storm is coming sooner than the old men believe, and when it comes, everything will get very simple very fast. Stones break, in storms. Sometimes that is the only mercy of them." Grace sat by the fire long after Diane had gone, watching the flames and turning it all over. The promise, the politics, the way Adam had looked at her across the yard that morning and then looked away. She was still there past midnight when the peace of the lodge broke. It broke with a howl from the northern ridge, long and urgent, a sound she had learned to read. Not joy, alarm. Within seconds the lodge was awake around her. Lights, voices, feet on stairs. Adam appeared at the head of the hall, and the look on his face pulled Grace to her feet. "The Northern Watch found strangers on our land," he said to the gathering family. 4 of them, on foot, moving toward the lodge, and then his eyes found Grace across the hall, and something in them made her cold. Grace. They were not armed for a fight. They were carrying rope, and a signal radio, and a photograph. He crossed the hall and held it out, and her own face looked up at her, a grainy picture taken through the diner window months ago, her name written under it, and one word under her name. Alive. The word ran through Grace like ice water. Around her the hall boiled with quiet fury. Orders, motion. But Grace stood very still, staring at the photograph, hearing Diane's voice by the fire. The storm is coming sooner than the old men believe. Adam was giving instructions, doubling the watches, sending word to the valley houses. Then he turned back to her, and for one unguarded moment, in front of the whole family, in front of Diane and her father, and all the old stone promises, his voice was not a leader's voice at all. "Nothing on this mountain will touch you," he said. "I swear it on my life." And from the doorway, where he had come in late from the northern ridge with snow still on his shoulders, Carl the Beta watched them both, and said nothing, and his face was unreadable. And in his pocket, though no one in that bright hall could know it, sat a small radio that did not belong to the Silvercrest family at all. Far to the north, in a house of black stone above a frozen lake, Victor Crane stood before a wall of maps and photographs and listened to the radio report with his eyes closed, like a man listening to music. Crane was not what Grace would have imagined, had she been able to see him. He was not wild or raging. He was neat, silver-haired, quietly spoken, a man who had never once raised his voice in 20 years, because he had never needed to. His family, the Blackwater family, had once been as honorable as any in the mountains, until his grandfather's time, when a border dispute and a hard winter and a long injustice, half real and half nursed into monstrous shape by 3 generations of retelling, had curdled them into something else. Crane had grown up on one story, told nightly like a prayer. The southern families had stolen the Blackwater birthright. The vault under Silvercrest Mountain held the proof, the old records, the original claims. Open the vault, and the Blackwater family would rule the ranges as they were always meant to. Whether the story was even true no longer mattered. Crane had spent his whole life on it, and a man who has spent his whole life on a story will burn the world before he lets the story be wrong. The key had cost him 20 years and a fortune. Finding it, Tracing Eleanor Hale's cold 60-year trail through the ordinary world had been the labor of his life. And then the key had turned uselessly in the lock, dead metal, and Crane had stood in the deep dark before the vault door and laughed until he wept, because of course the old families had bound it to the healer's blood. He should have seen it decades ago. Now his patience, the terrible patience of his kind, had found its final shape. On the wall before him hung the photograph of a waitress, and around it, growing week by week, everything his watchers and his money could learn. The brother's illness, the debts, the grandmother's grave, and in the last month, a new stream of information, richer and closer, from a source inside the Silvercrest Lodge itself. Every family has its wound, Crane said softly to the man waiting behind him. Silvercrest's wound is named Carl. Passed over, you see. Adam's father promised Carl's father that leadership of the family would one day come back to their branch, and then died, and the family chose young Adam instead, and Carl swallowed it, the way men swallow stones. 20 years he has carried it. And now he watches Adam set aside a marriage of policy, risk a war with the East, upend every stone tradition, all for an outsider, a Hale. Crane opened his eyes and smiled at the photograph of Grace. I did not buy Carl with money. Money buys servants. I bought him with a story. The same coin I was bought with, long ago. I promised him that when the vault is open and the old order falls, Silvercrest will need a leader of the old blood and the old ways. Men do not betray for gold, my friend. They betray for the version of themselves they were promised and denied. The man behind him, the tall one with the scarred eyebrow whom Grace had faced down in an alley a lifetime ago, shifted his weight. And the girl? We could take her on the mountain. Carl can arrange a gap in the watch. No, Crane said. On the mountain she is surrounded by 400 years of stone and loyalty, and Adam Cole has proven harder to remove than I hoped. He turned from the wall. You do not pry a pearl from a closed shell, Marcus. You wait for the shell to open itself. He drew from his desk a thin file and handed it across. The healer's line has one law written deeper than any vault, deeper than blood. A healer cannot walk past suffering. It is not a choice for them. It is what they are. So we will not go to the mountain and take her. We will set a fire in the valley, and she will come down to us, of her own free will, on her own 2 feet, with her family's blessing or without it. He tapped the file. There is a town at the foot of their mountain, Silvercrest, the human town, where she worked, where her neighbors live, where the boy Danny's human grandmother keeps a shop, where every thread of her old ordinary life is still pinned to the earth. Winter is deep. Roads can close. Power can fail. Sickness can visit the ordinary humankind, and medicine can somehow not arrive. No claws, no bullets, nothing that breaks their precious hidden peace or gives Adam Cole a war he can fight. Just a town full of innocent people, slowly drowning in misfortune, one valley below a healer. Crane smiled again, and it was the smile of a patient man at the end of his patience, which is the most dangerous smile in the world. She ran toward a gunshot for a stranger, Marcus. What do you suppose she will do for a whole town of them? We will not have to hunt Grace Miller at all. We will simply open the door, and stand in the dark beside it, and let her walk through. Marcus took the file. And Carl? What does he do? Carl does the hardest work of all, Crane said, turning back to his maps. Nothing. He keeps his watch. He nods at the right times. He stays exactly the loyal shadow he has always seemed. Until the one night we need a gate left open, and a warning to arrive late. One night, one gap, one silence. That is the whole price of a family's future. He looked a last time at the photograph of the waitress, and for a moment, something almost like regret crossed his neat gray face. The ghost of the man he might have been 3 stories ago. It is a pity, he said quietly. From everything I have read of her, she is the best of them. But the vault only needs her hand for one turning. And a world built on old stories, Marcus, has no room in it for new ones. Outside the black stone house, snow began to fall on the frozen lake, the first flakes of the great winter storm that the weathermen were already tracking as it rolled down from the north, vast and slow and patient, straight toward the valley of Silvercrest. The storm shut the valley like a fist. For 6 days snow fell without pause, and when it finally stopped, the town of Silvercrest below the mountain lay buried and dark. The power lines were down across 20 miles. The highway was closed. And then, in the worst of it, word crackled up to the lodge over the emergency radio. relayed from Ruth's contacts in the town clinic. Sickness was moving through the snowed-in houses, a hard winter fever, and it was hitting the old people and the children first, and the medicine flight from the city had been grounded 3 times by weather that somehow always closed in exactly when the plane was ready, and the clinic's generator had failed, in a way the mechanic could not explain, and the town's 2 nurses had not slept in 4 days. Grace stood in the radio room and listened, and the family watched her listen, and Vera watched her most of all. "It is him," Adam said flatly. He did not need to say the name. In a week of watching the storm, they had all learned to see the hand inside the weather of bad luck, grounded flights, a failed generator, a fever that spread just a little too neatly along the map. Nothing you could fight, nothing you could even prove. It is a trap, Grace. The oldest and simplest kind. He is not attacking the town. He is baiting a hook with it, and the hook is shaped exactly like you. "I know," Grace said. "You cannot go down there." "I know that too," she said. She looked around the radio room, at the faces she had come to love, and then at the frost-white window, beyond which, under the smothered valley, Mrs. Hartley, who had tipped her $1 every Sunday for 4 years, was fighting a fever in a cold, dark house, and the Ortiz twins from the apartment downstairs, and Officer Bell, and Pete the cook. And then she said the thing she had been 3 days arriving at, the thing that had come to her in Vera's sunlit teaching room between one breath and the next. "So I will not go down as bait," she said. "I will go down as a plan." They argued, of course. The whole family argued, in the great hall, late into the night. Adam argued hardest of all, and Grace stood in front of him and did not bend. And finally, in front of everyone, she said the only thing she had that outweighed his fear. "You told me once that a debt of life is not a small thing among your people," she said. "That it is a bond. Then hear me. That town raised me. It carried my brother and me through the worst years of our lives on casseroles, and covered shifts, and 100 small mercies nobody ever wrote down. My debt is older than yours, Adam Cole. You of all people do not get to stand there and tell me not to pay it." The hall was silent. Vera, in her chair by the fire, smiled down at her folded hands, like a woman hearing an old, old song come around again. And Adam looked at Grace for a long moment, and every person in that hall saw what Diane had seen, written plainly on the face of a man whose word was stone, and he surrendered the only way a leader can, by making her fight his own. "Then we plan it together," he said. "All of it. Every step. And Grace," he added, quiet enough that only she heard, "if you fall into the dark down there, I am coming in after you, and stone promises and Eastern politics, and the whole order of these mountains can burn." The plan took a day to build, and it was a good plan. Grace would go down openly with the family's relief convoy, snowcats and supplies and Ruth's medicines, everything above board, a mountain community helping its neighbors, the kind of thing even human newspapers would smile at. She would heal quietly, hands-on, under cover of nursing, the way her grandmother once had in this same valley. The family would hold the town like a hidden garrison, watchers on every roofline. Let Crane's people look at that wall of quiet strength and find no gap in it. And all the while, Diane's family would sweep down from the eastern range, along Crane's exposed flank, so that any move he made on the town would cost him his own house. It was a good plan. Everyone said so. Carl helped build it. Carl assigned the watch rotations, of course. That was the beta's duty. It had been his duty for 20 years. The convoy went down the mountain in white morning light, and the town of Silvercrest wept to see it come. And for 2 days, the plan worked. The generator was repaired within hours by 3 of the family's mechanics. Medicine and hot food moved street to street. And through the frozen little houses walked a young woman the town remembered from the diner, wrapped in a red coat, checking fevers with her bare hands. And behind her, the fevers broke, house by house. And the old people slept easy, and the children asked for breakfast, and the 2 exhausted nurses called it the turn of the sickness, and never knew, and never would. Grace worked until she was gray with tiredness, and the current poured through her hour after hour, and each evening Adam was there, making her eat, standing guard over her sleep in the clinic's back room, and neither of them spoke of the porch or the promises, and both of them thought of nothing else. On the 3rd night, the trap closed. It closed at 4 in the morning, at the change of watch, in the 11-minute gap that existed on no schedule except the one Carl had truly written. It closed with the clinic's radio dying. In the same moment the town's power failed again, with the 2 family sentries on the clinic roof answering a false recall signal that came in perfect code, because it had been sent from a Silvercrest radio, by a Silvercrest hand. It closed swiftly, silently, professionally, without one violation of the hidden peace, exactly as Crane had promised. Grace woke in the dark of the back room, to a soft sound, and a hand over her mouth, and Marcus of the scarred eyebrow, crouched at her bedside, like something grown from the shadows, and behind him, more men filled the doorway, quiet as falling snow. "You screamed an alarm at me once," Marcus said softly. "Not tonight." But it was not Grace who made the sound that shattered that silence, and it was not any plan of Crane's patient building that broke first. It was a 16-year-old boy with newly strong lungs, who had smuggled himself down the mountain in the 3rd supply truck against every order, because he would not be left behind twice, who had been sleeping across the clinic hallway in the storeroom, and who stepped into that hallway at exactly the wrong moment, and understood everything in half a second, and used his new lungs to do the one thing Grace had drilled into him since he was small, back when the world was ordinary. Leo made noise. He hurled a steel tray of instruments through the front window of the clinic into the street, and screamed fire, 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 the one word that empties every house in a snowbound town, and lights bloomed in windows up and down the street, like the whole valley opening its eyes, and Marcus flinched from the sound, as his masters had taught him never to flinch, and in that flinch, Grace tore free and reached for her brother. She almost reached him. The last thing she saw, as the cloth with its sweet chemical smell came over her face, and the dark rushed in, was Leo being pulled through the broken window to safety by townspeople in nightclothes, alive, safe, shouting her name. And her last thought, strange and calm and clear as the bottom of a river, was that, whatever else happened now, whatever waited for her in the north, they had made one mistake tonight that no plan of Crane's could take back. They had made her stop being afraid for anyone else. Now she was only Grace, alone, and every drop of the current was hers to spend, and the far bank of her own river, the one Vera had warned her to fear, lay dead ahead in the dark, and Grace went down into unconsciousness unafraid, like a woman going home. She woke to cold, and stone, and the taste of chemicals, and a lamp burning on a table, and Victor Crane sitting beside it reading a book, waiting for her, with the patience of a man who had waited 20 years, and could easily wait 1 hour more. The room was underground. She knew it the way she now knew such things, feeling the mountain's weight above her like a held breath. Blackwater stone, old and dark, no windows, one door, and beyond it, she could feel them, warm lamps in her mind's eye, 8 men in the corridor, and further off, deeper down, something else, a vast cold absence in the shape of a door, that could only be the vault. They had not brought her to the north house above the frozen lake at all. They had brought her under Silvercrest Mountain itself, to the old deep places, through some back door of Crane's 20-year study, to within 100 steps of the lock her blood was made for. Efficient, patient, of course. "He is quite safe, your brother," Crane said, without looking up from his book. "That is your first question, so I will spare you asking it. He is back at the lodge by now, being scolded and celebrated in equal measure, I imagine. We do not make war on children." He closed the book. "Despite everything you have been told about me, there is very little I make war on. I am, before anything else, a man correcting a wrong." He told her the story then. The whole of it, the border, the winter, the stolen birthright, the vault of proofs, 3 generations of the tale polished like a stone in a pocket. He told it beautifully, quietly, reasonably, and Grace, sitting in a hard chair with her hands unbound because where could she possibly go, listened to the end. And because she was Eleanor Hale's granddaughter, and because she had spent a winter learning to feel the truth of living things under her hands, she heard what Victor Crane himself could no longer hear inside his own smooth voice. The hollow place, the doubt, bricked over 50 years ago, still faintly ringing. "You have never actually seen the proof," she said, when he finished. 60 years your family has hunted this vault, and the whole claim rests on what your grandfather said was in it. You do not want the vault opened, Mr. Crane. You need it opened, because you have spent your entire life on a story you have never once been able to check. For the first time in 20 years, in that stone room under the mountain, somebody saw Victor Crane's composure move. It was a small thing, a tightening at the corner of his eyes, gone in an instant. But she saw it, and he saw her see it, and something in the air between them changed, and did not change back. "You will open the door," he said, standing. "Tonight. The moon is right, the hour is right, and I have waited long enough. And if the proof is not there," Grace said, "if the records say your grandfather was simply wrong, what then, for you?" "Walk," said Victor Crane. They walked, down cut stone stairs, along a corridor where the lamps of his 8 men surrounded her warm and close, down and down into air that grew colder and older, and all the while Grace walked with her head up and her hands loose at her sides, and did the thing that no one in that procession could see or imagine. She reached, the way Vera had taught her in the sunlit room. She felt each lamp of life around her, each of the 8 guards, and Marcus, and Crane himself, burning at her left shoulder like a cold, clear flame. Both banks of the river, child. She had promised herself she would never visit the far one, and she walked toward the vault of her grandmother's exile, counting heartbeats that were not her own, and made a healer's terrible arithmetic, and her face showed nothing at all. The vault door filled the end of the last corridor, taller than 2 men, a single slab of pale mountain stone, bound in metal, that 60 years of dark had never dulled, and at its center, a small-shaped hole, and in Crane's gloved hand, brought out from his coat with something dangerously near reverence, the key. Old and long and strange, the exact ghost of the shape pressed into the felt of a broken cedar box in a wrecked apartment at the bottom of another life. "You will turn it," Crane said, placing it in her hand and closing her fingers over it, and his quiet voice at last had a wire of something taut inside it. "And whatever your clever guesses about my heart, understand my hand. 2 of my men are standing tonight, within sight of that lodge on the mountain. If this door does not open, or if anything comes through it but history, the first call they receive concerns the boy who breathes so much better now. Do you understand me? History, Miss Miller. That is all either of us wants. Give me my history, and you and yours will see the spring." And there it was, at the end of all his patience and philosophy, the truth of him, plain as a drawn blade. Grace looked down at the key in her palm. She thought of Eleanor, 23 years old, standing in front of this same door in the last summer anyone saw her, choosing exile and slander and 60 years of silence over the smallest chance of this exact night. She thought of Adam, who was coming, who was surely coming. She could almost feel it, a far-off gathering in the mountain above like weather. She thought, last of all and longest, of Vera's voice in the sunlit room. "A healer cannot bear harm, child. That is the lock inside the lock. That is why it had to be your line, and no other. The door does not open for Hale blood. It opens for a Hale heart, and it weighs it. And the old ones built it so that no one could ever reach this stone with rage in her hands and leave alive with what is behind it. They had told Crane none of that. 60 years of secrets, and that one had kept." Grace stepped forward and slid the key into the stone, and felt the whole mountain wake around her hand like something vast opening one eye. The metal warmed. The current stirred, questioning, reading her, exactly as Vera had said it would, weighing what she carried down into the dark. And Grace closed her eyes and gave the old door her honest answer, the whole of it, the fear and the fury and the arithmetic and, underneath everything, unbroken, the thing she had carried up a dark alley toward gunfire a lifetime ago, the simple, stubborn will that no one else should be hurt tonight if she could stand between. The lock drank the truth of her, and approved, and turned. The sound of the vault door unsealing after 60 years rolled up through the stone corridors, like the mountain clearing its throat, and in the same long moment, far above and not far at all, it was answered. Faint through half a mile of rock came a chorus the Blackwater men knew in their spines, many voices and one purpose, closer than any of them had believed possible, because the family above had not spent the night searching the mountain at all. They had spent it following a trail of the only map that mattered, the one Grace had been laying for hours through the deep dark with her own bright, unmistakable gift, every healed sentry and quickened heart, a lantern in the dark saying, "Here, here, she is here." Crane's men spun toward the corridor. Crane himself never turned. He stood, staring into the opening vault with his lamp raised, and 20 years burning in his face, and Grace Miller stood beside him, with her hand still on the key, between the coming storm and the oldest story in the mountains, exactly, at last, where everyone had always intended her to be. The vault was a library. That was the first shock, in the swinging lamplight, as the great stone door stood open on its silent hinges. Not gold, not weapons, not anything a fevered family story could feed on. Shelves, cut from the living rock, rising into the dark, and on them, ledgers and letters and rolled maps and bound registers, hundreds upon hundreds, the patient paperwork of 3 centuries of hidden lives. The air that breathed out of it was dry and cold, and smelled of ink and time. Crane walked in like a man walking into a church he had built in his mind since childhood, and was seeing for the first time with his eyes. His men hung back at the door, torn between the treasure and the growing thunder in the corridors behind them. Marcus was shouting orders, setting a defense at the last stair. It would not hold long, and everyone knew it. The mountain above was coming down through its own bones, and it was angry. But in the vault there was a strange pocket of stillness, and in it, Victor Crane hunted. He knew what he was looking for. He had known its description all his life, the way other men know a prayer. The boundary register of the northern ranges, the original, sealed by all 6 families 300 years ago. His hands, steady through 20 years of patience, shook now as they moved along the shelves, and then stopped. The register was exactly where the old record said it would be. Grace stood by the door with the key still in her hand, and watched a man meet his own story. Crane laid the great book on the stone reading table, and opened it, and turned the old pages one by one, and his lamp threw his shadow huge up the shelves, and the thunder in the corridors grew, and Grace watched his face, and so she was the only one who saw the exact moment, page by page, that Victor Crane's life ended. Not his heartbeat, his life, the story that had been his spine. The proof was there. That was the cruelty of it. The original claim, the border, the disputed valley, all of it, set down in faded formal hands. And the record showed, plainly, patiently, with signatures and seals, including the careful signature of Crane's own great-grandfather, that the dispute had been heard, and settled, and paid in full and fairly, and closed with the free consent of the Blackwater family, 2 years before the winter that the family story blamed for everything. The theft was not misremembered. It had never happened at all. The grievance that had bent 3 generations, that had turned an honorable family into a weapon, that had made this night and all its ruin, had been born not of a wrong, but of one bitter man's refusal, long ago, to tell his sons that he had agreed to a fair price. 60 years, Crane said. His voice was very quiet, almost conversational, and worse than any shout. He was not speaking to her. He turned another page, as if a different truth might be printed further on. My father died for this in the search years, my brother. 20 years of my own life. He looked up, and his eyes found Grace across the vault, and they were the emptiest things she had ever seen. You knew, he said. Somehow. In the room above, you knew what I would find. I guessed what you were afraid of, Grace said. It was in your voice. It has always been in your voice, I think. That is the thing about a story you never check, Mr. Crane. Some part of you always knows why you never check it. And perhaps, in some other night, that could have been the end. A gutted man, an open book, a quiet surrender in the deep dark. But the thunder chose that moment to reach them. The last stair fell, the corridor filled with the family, and Victor Crane, standing in the ashes of his own reason, with 3 centuries of records at his fingertips, did the last, worst arithmetic of his life. If the story was false, then he was not a wronged heir. He was only a man who had done what he had done, unless no one ever left this mountain to say so. The lamps, the dry ancient paper, the one door. His hand moved toward the reading lamp with a terrible, simple calm, to burn the truth, and everyone standing in it. 2 things happened faster than the fire could. The first came through the vault door, gray and huge and inevitable. Adam had led his family down through the mountain's own hidden throat, following the trail of lanterns Grace's gift had left in the dark, and he came through the doorway not as the quiet man from the corner booth but as everything that quiet had ever held in check, and Crane's guard broke before him like river ice in spring. He was through them, and across the vault in the time it takes to gasp, and Crane's wrist, lamp and all, stopped in the air, as if it had struck the mountain itself. The second happened, where no eye could see it. Grace crossed the far bank of her river at last, and did it as a healer does everything. Precisely, gently, without wrath. She laid her bare hand on Victor Crane's gray head, and she did not harm him. She did the opposite, and it was more terrible. She poured the current in, and swept the last dust of the story out of the deep hollow place where he had bricked it, and for the first time in 50 years, Victor Crane stood in the world exactly as it was, with nothing between him and everything he had done, and no story left to carry any of it for him. His hand opened. The lamp was caught. And the most patient man in the mountains sat down slowly on the stone floor of the vault his family had dreamed of for 3 generations, amid the records of a debt paid in full 300 years ago, and wept like the child who had first been told the tale. "Take him up gently," Vera said from the doorway. She had come down with the family, white braid and steady eyes, and her gaze went around the vault, the shelves, the open register, the old cold air, and something 60 years heavy moved through her face. "Gently," she said again. "There has been enough." It was in that hush, with the fight already over, that the night's last wound opened. A radio crackled at the belt of one of Crane's kneeling men, and Marcus, held by 3 of the family with his scarred eyebrow bleeding, laughed once, ugly and hopeless, and said, "You are all forgetting the standing order. The lodge. If the signal stops coming, they move on the lodge." And Adam turned and looked, not at Marcus, but past him, at the one man of Silvercrest who had come down the mountain last of all, who had run the watches and known the signals, whose radio alone could have cancelled that order or carried it, whose face, in the lamplight of the plundered vault, had gone the color of the old paper on the shelves. "Carl," Adam said, into the silence. And it was not a question, and it was not thunder. It was quiet, and it was worse than thunder. "Give me your radio, brother, and give me one reason, and God help us both, let them be the same thing." For one endless moment in the lamplight, Carl stood between 2 roads, and the whole vault held its breath, and Grace, who could feel the truth of living things under her hands, and sometimes now without them, felt his lamp gutter and flare like a candle in a draught. 20 years of swallowed stones, a promised crown, gone to ash on the floor with Crane's story, and in front of him, the man he had betrayed, calling him brother, and meaning it, even now, and that word did what no threat could have done. Carl did not fight, and he did not lie. He lifted the radio, keyed the Silvercrest cancel code with a steady hand, spoke the countersign, and got back, after 4 heartbeats that aged everyone present, the answering click that meant the watchers near the lodge had stood down and gone. Then he set the radio at Adam's feet and knelt on the old stone, and in front of the family and the eldest and the open vault, he gave up all of it. The promise Crane had fed him, the 11-minute gap, the false recall, every silence, in the flat scraped voice of a man, setting down at last a weight that had crushed him hollow. "I told myself no one would be truly hurt," he finished. "That is the pit under all of it. There is always a story, and I watched a better man than me weep on this floor tonight for the same disease, and I have no other defense." He looked up at Adam then, and 20 years were in his face. "Your father promised mine, but you never wronged me, Adam, not once, in your whole life. That is the thing I could not forgive. Judgment belonged to the leader, by law older than the vault. The vault had one more thing to say about it. For when Adam turned to Vera, and Vera, instead of answering, turned to the shelves, walked down the long rows 60 years of memory could still navigate, and drew out a slim bound register, the record of promises of the 6 families, and opened it on the table beside Crane's terrible book, there, in faded ink, was the promise of Adam's father to Carl's, set down and witnessed. And beneath it, in the same hand, dated the same year Eleanor ran, a second entry that no one living had ever read, releasing the promise, dissolved by mutual consent, and the reason written plainly: "Leadership must go where the mountain wills it, not where our grief bargains." Signed by both fathers, together, at peace. Carl read it twice, on his knees, and put his face in his hands. His father had released the claim before Carl was 10 years old, and had nursed the grievance aloud anyway, all his bitter life, and had never told his son the stone in his pocket was a keepsake he had chosen to carry. 2 families in one night, unmade by the same lie of the same shape. Vera closed the register gently. "That is why the vault matters, children," she said. "To everyone and no one. Not for what it proves about land. For what it remembers about hearts, after the hearts are gone and only the stories are left, growing in the dark." They came up out of the mountain, into a dawn, washed clean by wind, and the days that followed moved like the spring melt, all at once and everywhere. Word went out to all 6 families, and to the northern valleys, where the Blackwater people, freed of Crane's iron story, sent envoys south within the month, stunned and ashamed and cautiously, painfully hopeful. Crane himself was not harmed. The family's law was older and stranger than punishment. He was taken north to live under watch in his black stone house, a quiet gray man who spent his days, by his own choice, writing out from memory a full and honest account of everything, and it was said by those who guarded him that he seemed, in some broken way, at peace, like a man who had set down a great weight at the cost of everything it had been holding up. Marcus and the hired men were handed, with tidily human evidence of tidily human crimes, to the tidily human law, and Officer Bell got a commendation he never fully understood. Carl was not cast out. Adam ruled, and the family upheld it, that the truest poison had been the lie his father fed him, and the truest fact was the cancel code sent with a steady hand. He was stripped of the Beta's place, and began, alone at first, the long work of rebuilding trust stone by stone, and it was Leo, of all the lodge, who first sat beside him at the long table like it was nothing, because, as the boy said with a shrug that undid the whole room, everybody in this family got handed a wrong story about somebody, and my sister taught me you check. The Eastern question answered itself with the spring. With the vault open, and the register of promises public to all families, Diane's father could not gracefully insist on a bond of policy whose whole purpose, guarding against the northern threat, had dissolved in a vault's lamplight. It was Diane who made the ending easy, arriving at the lodge in the first week of thaw, striding up to Adam and Grace in front of the entire porch, and announcing that she had come to release a stone nobody wanted carried, that her father sent his seal on it, and that she expected, in exchange, to be invited to the wedding and seated well. Then she kissed Grace on both cheeks and said, "Lo, I told you. Storms make everything simple. You are welcome." They were married at midsummer, in the high meadow, under a sky so big it made the lodge look small, with all 6 families gathered, and the town of Silvercrest invited up the mountain for a wedding they would talk about for 50 years, without ever quite being able to say what had felt so unusual about the light, or the singing in the far trees at moonrise. Vera stood for Eleanor's memory. Leo gave his sister away, and stood the whole ceremony beaming, breathing easily, tall as summer grass. And the story keeps one more picture, at the very end, the way rivers keep light. It is autumn again, a year and a night, since a gunshot cracked outside a roadside diner. The diner still stands at the edge of town, busier than ever, under new ownership, and the new owner still ties on an apron some evenings, just because she likes the work, and the coffee is better than it has any right to be. And sick children in that town have a way of getting well that the county doctors have stopped trying to explain. In the corner booth, the one with its back to the wall and its eyes on the whole room, there is a small brass plate that says only, "Reserved." And some nights, late, when the highway is quiet and the moon stands over the mountains, a tall dark-haired man comes in out of the cold and sits in that booth, and a woman pours him black coffee without being asked, and sits down across from him, and if you saw them, you would see nothing at all remarkable. A man, a waitress, an old song on the radio. You would never guess what walks the high meadows above that town, or what sleeps in the deep vault under the mountain, or that the whole hidden peace of 6 families runs, at the last, through the 2 quiet people laughing softly in the corner of a roadside diner. You would only think, perhaps, on your way out into the night, that you had rarely seen 2 people look at each other like that, like each was the door the other had spent a whole life walking toward. And you would be right, and that is the whole truth of it, which is more than most stories can say.